Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. We're going to talk about chord symbols today. We've discussed triads and seventh chords at length, and the way we use chords today is we very often have chord symbols that represent the chords, and it's kind of complicated because different people use them differently. And what I've done here is gone through and come up with kind of a synopsis of what I see as common usage of chord symbols today so that you can understand them as you come across them in sheet music that is found in songbooks, lead sheets, fake books, things like that. Now, just so you know, for these things to be really useful, you need to be able to practice these chords on a guitar or a piano and figure out different ways of playing the same chord. So when you see a chord like a C chord, you have lots of different ways of playing that chord so that whatever you're playing, you can use that chord in the proper context. Okay, so let's look at some of these chord symbols. These are the five types of the four types of triads, and then we'll talk a little bit about inversions here. The major triad, which we've discussed, 1, 3, 5 of a major scale. All you need to use for a chord symbol for that is a capital C. So whatever the name of the chord is, whatever the root of the chord is, a capital letter with that name or that letter will represent that chord, and everybody understands that. You don't have to write a big M, you don't have to write major. Everybody understands that a capital letter means a major chord. So that's all you need to know for that. The other ones are a little bit more complicated just because people do use different things. A minor triad, which a C minor triad would be C, E flat, G. Okay, one lowered third and fifth of a major scale. The minor triad, we have a number of different chord symbols that are used. A small M, that's what I use when I write sheet music for tunes. If you use the small M, make sure that the M is small, that it's not half the size of it's at least smaller than half the size of the name of the chord. So a really small M is perfectly fine. If you write MI, it's a little bit safer, and that's okay. MIN, even more clear. As I said, this is the one I use, but I see lots of other people using these, and just anybody will see this and they're going to know that that's a minor triad. Now this is one, a dash. This is something that came back in the 1970s from either Berklee School of Music in Boston or North Texas State, I forget which one, came up with the idea that a dash meant minor. I still see it sometimes. I don't recommend using it, but if you ever see a dash, what that means is minor. So C minor could be written like this, 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 or this, and it's all the same chord, C, E flat, G. An augmented triad, the recommended chord symbol for me is C, E, is a plus sign. C, E, G sharp, 1, 3, raised 5 of a major scale. Okay, so you raise the fifth, you have an augmented fifth in there. That's the augmented chord, and this would be the recommended chord symbol I would use. C, A, U, G, that's okay, but it's unnecessary. The plus is universally understood. Never had anybody ask whether, what the chord is if they see a plus. That means an augmented triad. A diminished triad, which you may recall is 1 lowered third, lowered fifth of a major scale. So C, E flat, G flat. The preferred chord symbol is a circle, a little degree sign. And that is universally understood to be a diminished sign. Some people write D-I-M. Some people write a little d. I don't think that's really the best. This is the one that I do. But if you see these, you know that it's the same chord. It's a diminished triad. Okay? Now, we talked about inversions of triads. In other words, we talked about a first inversion triad being a triad where the third of the chord is in the bass. So you play a C chord, and if you put the E in the bass, it's in first inversion. Now, in modern notation, in fake books, lead sheets, sheet music from songbooks and so forth, sometimes this is how they will write that. They'll write C/E, and that means C with an E in the bass. It's a way of indicating a first inversion triad. Or sometimes they'll write it out E bass. But this means the same thing. If you see C/E, it means C with an E in the bass. Okay? If it's in second inversion, that means that the fifth of the chord is in the bass, and we can indicate it like that. I'm playing a C chord with my right hand, and with my left hand, I'm playing a G in the bass. So we have a way of indicating inversions, and that helps us create a little bit better bass lines sometimes. Okay? So here's the major, minor, augmented, diminished triads, and the first and second inversions. Okay, that takes us to seventh chords. As we discovered, there are 5 types of seventh chords. I put them in this order: dominant seventh, major seventh, minor seventh, half diminished seventh, and a diminished seventh. For a dominant seventh chord, which is 1, 3, 5, lowered seventh, C, E, G, B flat, the accepted symbol by virtually everyone is just C7. You don't have to write dominant, you don't have to write a big D, you don't have to write anything. C7 means C dominant seventh, and in a few minutes we'll come back and explain why that is. So that's all you need. If you see just a 7, it means a dominant seventh chord. Now a major seventh chord is 1, 3, 5, 7 of a major scale with no alterations. So that's C, E, G, B on a C. So a C major seventh is a C, E, G, and B. And these are the different symbols that are used. As you can see, there's quite a few different ones. MA7, that's the one that I use. It's foolproof. Everybody gets that. MAJ7 takes a microsecond longer to write, but that's really clear. Lowercase ma is all right because you've got the A in there. Capital M7, again, be really careful that it's a full-size M, because if it's too small, somebody might play a minor while somebody else plays a major, and that doesn't sound very good. So if you're going to use the capital M, make sure it's really big. Now this one, again, from back to the 1970s, somebody came up with a great idea that if you write a triangle, that's going to mean major seventh. Okay? Now, the thing about that is that not everybody got the email. Well, partly because there was no email back then. But the idea was that you're supposed to be able to just write a triangle, and that meant major seventh. Okay? It doesn't mean just major, it means major seventh. And then, just to be clear, some people started writing like this, with a triangle and a 7. It's supposed to be just that, but it got very confusing. And again, I do not recommend using that symbol, but if you find some sheet music from the 70s or 80s and you see that, that's what it means. It means a major seventh chord. And again, most people don't use that symbol anymore, but just so you know, that's what it is. Now, a minor seventh chord, C, E flat, G, B flat. 1 lowered third, 5th lowered 7th. The recommended chord symbols, I like a little m. And again, I make sure that the m is really small so that you don't confuse it with this. Okay, once again, you don't want some different people playing a different chord. So little m, if you're careful, is good. Mi is fine. Min is fine as well. And again, going back to the 1970s and in a decade or so beyond, a -7, if you ever see that, it means minor seventh. Again, I don't recommend using it if you're writing new music, but if you see it, that means a minor seventh. Okay, then we get to the half diminished seventh chord. A half diminished seventh chord is 1 lowered third, lowered 5th, lowered 7th. Now, because of the way we use that chord today, the recommended symbol is minor 7 flat 5. Now think about this. A minor seventh is C, E flat, G, B flat. C minor 7 flat 5 is C minor 7 G flat and a B flat. So if I take this chord and I flat the 5th, I get what is traditionally called a half diminished 7th chord. Okay? This term is more commonly used in classical and more traditional forms. Jazz and pop today, we typically use minor 7 flat 5 is what we usually call that chord. It's the same chord, all right? Now the traditional notation for this was a circle with a slash through it, without a 7 on it. Some people add the 7, it's redundant because the slash means minor 7 flat 5 or half diminished. But if you see it, these 3 chord symbols all mean the same thing. Minor 7 flat 5, half diminished 7th. Bottom line is that means C, E flat, G flat, and B flat. Now, we come to this, that the diminished 7th chord is 1, 3, 5, and a doubly lowered 7th. So I'm going to take that B and doubly flat it. So it sounds like C, E flat, G, and it sounds like an A. But for class or for theoretical purposes, we want to call it a B double flat, right? So C, E flat, G flat, B double flat. Common chord symbols for this, a diminished 7th is perfectly fine. Just a circle with a 7. If you want to write DIM 7, that's fine. CD7 is fine, but it means a diminished 7th. Now, here's a question. You notice that for the diminished 7th, you have to write something. You have to write a circle or a DIM or a D. For this one, you have to write this or this. For the minor, you've got to use an M or a dash or this. For the major 7th, you have to write something that indicates that it's major. But for the dominant 7th chord, all you have to do is say C7. And you may be wondering why that is. And the obvious answer might be that it's more common, and yes it is. I would say that in styles of music that use only triads and 1 7th chord, it's more typical to add a dominant 7th chord to the mix. For example, folk or folk rock, those type of things will often use triads and the dominant 7th chord. But the real answer is that this one came first. And when I say first, I don't mean by a few months or years. I'm talking decades, maybe even a century. From the time that this chord was first used till the time that people started using this chord, and then the last one to be used was actually the major 7th chord. And that, I realize, to modern ears that may seem strange, but it took a long time for people to get to the point where they would use this chord here. This chord came about, I believe, in the late Renaissance period, maybe back around before 1600 even, long time ago. And that is that somebody was singing and added the 7th, which became the dominant 7th chord. And literally that chord was the only 7th chord that was used for a really long time. So when we say dominant 7th, we say C7. It was the only 7th chord for a really long time. Now it's interesting that this one, the major 7th, today, we're very familiar with that chord. And we use that chord a lot in, soft rock music, all kinds of things, jazz, lots of different forms. But it wasn't until the early 20th century that it really started to be used. So again, it was the last one that was added, okay? The dominant 7th chord came first, and then these others came along, and then finally the major 7th chord. Okay, so take a look at that for a second, and I'm going to sign off here, and then I'm going to put up some exercises for you to do with these chord symbols. All right, be back soon.